You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, it is audio only for the next 2 days. I'm out of town, and actually, also, I should mention, if there's any audio issues as well, I apologize. I'm recording this on my phone. I think it'll sound okay. I bring my mic when I go on the road. But today, for whatever reason, or on this trip, I forgot the cord that makes my mic attached to my laptop. So, already doing things a little bit differently, but I wanted to get a show out today because a lot went down on Friday. First things first, we'll talk about the first segment. It's the Mets beating the Marlins, doing what you're supposed to do against a bad team. But also, David Stearns met with the media prior to the game, and he got into a lot of interesting stuff that I want to discuss. The health of Kodai Senga and Christian Scott, whether we'll see Brandon Sproat this year, talked a little bit about Baty and Mark Vientos. I'll cover all of that in the final 2 segments today. Before we get into any of it, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. All right, so let's open things up talking about the Mets game, because they did what you're supposed to do, and it was a beautiful thing. You go up against the Marlins, and you face Roger Munoz. You got to score runs, and if you're Sean Manaea, you got to pitch deep into the game, and both of those things happen. Exactly what you wanted coming in. The Mets delivered on all fronts. Even Jose Butto with 2 scoreless innings out of the bullpen. So this was a pitch-perfect game against a bad team. Now, the Mets got on the board early in the first inning thanks to an error by the Marlins. When another team makes a mistake, you capitalize on it. The Mets went with a different lineup today. Francisco Lindor batting leadoff, Mark Vientos batting second. Brandon Nimmo, I talked about dropping him all the way to 9th on yesterday's show. They went to just dropping him from the 2-hole to the 3-hole, which originally I didn't love. Nimmo made me like it a little bit more later in the game. But in that first inning, Nimmo hits a dribbler to the pitcher. Pitcher makes a bad throw. Munoz throws it away. That allows Nimmo to get to second base. Now there's 2 outs, runner on second. JD Martinez, who's batting cleanup, comes up. Take advantage of those spots. He gets a base hit to score Nimmo, and the Mets get on the board first. Now, Sean Manaea was pitching well early, but in the 4th inning, he gives up that lead. Gives up a pair of doubles that ultimately result in 2 runs, although the second run, not entirely his fault. He got what could have been an inning-ending double play. Pete Alonso not able to keep his foot on the bag. That allows a second run to score. So for a fleeting moment, we were all worried. Like, oh gosh, here we go again. Mets against a bad team. They're losing. The bats aren't going through the first 3 innings. Really, the only run the Mets got was because the Marlins made a mistake. And I don't know about you guys, but I was getting a little bit worried. I mean, come on. How could you not? It's the Marlins. And for some reason, they're not as easy to beat as they should be. But today, the Mets got the job done thanks to a huge 4th inning. And it all started with Jeff McNeil. Francisco Alvarez got on with a walk, and Jeff McNeil cashed him in with a 2-run homer. His 7th since the All-Star break. 12th in the season. The way Jeff McNeil's hitting home runs, he might get to 20 this year. Who even knows? It is unbelievable the tear that Jeff has been on, and he broke that ice for the Mets. They take the lead back, and then they just make it a lopsided game quickly, which was awesome to see. Harrison Bader drew a walk. He scored on an RBI triple from Francisco Lindor. Mark Vientos got hit by a pitch. And as I said, I like Nimmo batting third a little bit more after this game because Nimmo ends up hitting a 3-run homer. And that's all the runs that Sean Manaea needed. He did give up another run on a homer to Jake Berger. Doesn't matter. He ends up going 7, which was huge for the Mets. And Jose Butto gets the job done, pitching the final 2 innings. Mets end up getting a huge, much-needed victory. Now, for this to actually be a victory that we can look back on and say, oh, yeah, great job, Mets. You got to back it up, okay? Just winning one against the Marlins and dropping Saturday's game, it erases all the goodwill that you built by taking care of business in this first game. I said it on yesterday's show through a lot of emotions as I recorded fresh after that frustrating game against the Athletics and that loss of a series where the Mets should have won it. I said it then, I'll say it now. You got to sweep this series. You got to beat up on this Marlins team. It's your last chance this season to play the Marlins. Make the most of it. I'm glad for at least this day the Mets did exactly that. And making things even more sweet when it comes to this victory, the Atlanta Braves lost to the Angels. So the Mets creep a little bit closer. Had they beaten the Athletics on Thursday, they'd be even with the Braves right now. But we'll take a game back. Nice little advancement from the Mets here to get a little bit closer. Hopefully the Braves, who looked for half of a second there when they took the first 3 games of that series against the Giants, like they were going to be back to being the same old Braves. They now lost 2 games in a row, and the hope is that losing might continue this weekend. The Angels were frisky against the Mets. Can they continue to grab at least one more even against the Braves? That would be a really big thing for this Mets team, where maybe we're waking up on Monday and the Mets are even with the Braves in this division. But at least for the night, no complaints about what happened on the field for the Mets. They did what they're supposed to do. Now we'll see if Luis Severino, going up against a top pitching prospect in Max Meyer, we'll see if Sevy can get the best out of Meyer in that matchup. I talked about Meyer on yesterday's show, a guy who started off this season and was fantastic. He has struggled since coming back up to the big leagues. Hopefully those struggles continue, but this is a guy that could lock in. It should be a very fun game, and the onus is on Sevy to pitch deep into this game and for this Mets lineup to find a way to score off Meyer and beyond that, get him out of the game early and beat up on the Marlins bullpen. You got to feel good about their chances considering what they did today, but even with that, it was one big inning. I'd like to see the Mets put it together inning over inning and really just make a statement this weekend, beating up a bad team and just getting themselves feeling confident and right before the Orioles come into town, because that test is going to be much, much tougher. Now, to close out the show, like I mentioned, David Stearns said a lot today. I want to break that all down, so we'll talk about it in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America, Liquid IV. What I love about Liquid IV is 3 things. For one, the taste. Okay, strawberry lemonade is my favorite flavor, and it just hits so much better than just drinking water alone. Not only because of that taste, but also because it hydrates me more. It gives you 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, and on top of that, super convenient. You just tear open a pouch, pour it into 16 ounces of water, and you are good to go. If you want to try Liquid IV, and no, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. If you want to try Liquid IV yourself, head over to liquidiv.com, where you'll have no more thirsty summers and you can indulge in hydration with Liquid IV and get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go, again, to liquidiv.com. Use the code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting 9 without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, David Stearns met with the media today, and I felt like we got a lot of really interesting tidbits. I don't know if it was just the time of year that he spoke, because other times he has had these media sessions and I haven't felt like we've learned much. Maybe it was just the questions that the reporters asked today, but I came away really interested in a lot of the different things that he said. I think there's a lot of talking points that we can go off of based on some of his comments. And the main one is Brandon Sproat. I think Brandon Sproat was sort of the story of the presser today. If those of you who aren't aware, Brandon Sproat is the top prospect in the Mets system. I know at Just Baseball, we have him ranked at number 18 in our top 100. So that shows you how highly valued this prospect is. That's the fourth best pitching prospect in all of baseball and the highest Met on the top 100. I think MLB Pipeline has Brandon Sproat at number 1 as well. So this guy is really exciting. He has gone from high A this year all the way up to triple A. And obviously, there's a lot of intrigue. I've been talking about Brandon Sproat potentially making his debut this season for months now. Okay, so this has been a story that I've been covering and a lot of outlets have. So I was excited to see the reporters sort of put David Stearns to the test here, ask him a lot of questions about Sproat, and we got some good answers. So here was the big thing that he said. He says, I think he has had, about Sproat, about as good of a minor league season as he could possibly have. I think he's thrown more strikes. He's rounded out his arsenal. He's improved his changeup. He's competed at a very high level, very consistently. He's bounced back from the occasional rough outing. So we've been really pleased with how he has developed this year. He then talked about the fact that Sproat needs experience. He said he's a very new player to professional baseball. Says he has moved quickly through the Mets system, and he has earned that. He said he deserves that. But I think we need to make sure he dominates the level he is at now before we talk about what he does next. Now, the reporters didn't stop asking him Sproat questions, and I loved it. They pressed him on it again, and this is where David Stearns basically sort of put a kibosh on all of the Sproat questions. He said he's a AAA player. When he's not a AAA player, he'll be happy to take questions about him. And that was in relation to the constant questions about if or when we could see Brandon Sproat this season. One of the questions is about the fact that Brandon Sproat does not need to be added to the 40-man roster this offseason. He was drafted just last year. So how would that weigh into the Mets' decision here, whether or not to promote Sproat? I think if you look at what David Stearns has said throughout his entire time being the GM of the Mets, as we've gotten to know, or the president of the Mets, he has said that when it comes to promoting a player, it comes down to two things: team need and where a player is at in his development. I think that David Stearns really, in this presser, he made it clear how much the Mets value Brandon Sproat. He made sure to acknowledge that there's still development that he needs to undergo in the minor leagues. And he also dodged the question about whether the Mets would call him up. He was also asked, and we'll talk about this a little bit as it relates to Brett Baty and Luis Angel Acuna, as well as others in the next segment, about the September call-ups. And he said that those positions, since it's now just 2, you get basically 1 pitcher and 1 hitter added to the roster, that those positions will be very fluid. You could see a lot of guys maybe go up and down in those spots. Essentially, it's an extension of the MLB taxi squad, if it were, especially on the pitching side of things. Now, when it comes to calling Sproat up, by saying he's a AAA player when he's not a AAA player, we'll talk about it. To me, that still, without intending it, leaves the door cracked, right? Like, you never know what's going to happen. I think that the Mets, in an ideal world, would not go to Brandon Sproat this year. Not my ideal world. In David Stearns' ideal world, they would stay away from promoting Brandon Sproat because the bullpen, with the internal options they already have outside of Sproat that are on the 40-man roster, that they'll be able to solidify things and they won't need him. And the same thing can be said about the starting rotation, that ultimately they would probably prefer to keep him in AAA, have him dominate that level to close out the year, then go into the offseason, keep him off the 40, keep that roster flexibility, and next year he has a chance to potentially win a job in spring training. That would be the most ideal outcome from a roster building perspective. But if the Mets need an arm, don't be surprised if they still call on Sproat, and then David Stearns will stand in front of the media, he'll answer the questions again, and he'll explain why MLB need, plus what this guy can do, has necessitated that call-up if and when that ever takes place. But again, a lot of really interesting stuff on Brandon Sproat, and it's clear that he is the crown jewel of this farm system right now. Now, on the pitching front, there was some other things discussed. There's a lot talked about when it came to the walks we've seen from the Mets this year. I didn't really learn anything new there. That didn't really jump out as something that needs to be discussed. He said that it's been something that they are cognizant of, they're working on. Steve Gelbs was really asking those questions, and others followed, but I don't really take much from it. He was also asked about the durability of the current starters, particularly Paul Blackburn coming off the long injury, David Peterson coming off the hip surgery, and potentially seeing his innings climb to a place that they haven't been before. And David Stearns basically said that the state of the rotation right now, they're in a good shape. Like on the medical side of things, how these guys are bouncing back from starts, what the trainers think, they believe that their rotation as presently constructed is in good standing to make it through this season. And obviously, there is still some depth beyond Brandon Sproat. And if the Mets needed a starting pitcher, I think Tyler McGill would still be the first guy up. You also have Mike Vassell, who is pitching well in AAA. Maybe he would come up. And you also have two injured pitchers, which is where we're going to go next here. Christian Scott and Kodai Senga. David Stearns answered questions on both of those guys. We'll start with Senga. He said that the Mets are still going through their initial, or that Kodai Senga is going through his initial phases of recovery right now. And the good news is because this is a lower body injury, he is able to keep his arm moving. He's able to throw, but throw immobilized. And he said the first big step that the Mets need to see is Kodai Senga get upright and throw. So right now, I don't know exactly if he's playing catch, if he's got a folding chair on a mound and he's throwing to a catcher, but Kodai Senga is throwing in a seated position clearly, keeping that arm going. So hopefully if and when he's cleared for throwing upright and then eventually to actually pitch, bullpen, live BPs, all that stuff, hopefully the ramp up is not as long as it was the last time when he was coming off of a long shoulder injury. So that is a good sign. And another big aspect of this is they asked when we might see Kodai Senga, or when he might get upright, and when that big step will take place. And David Stearns said hopefully within the next 7 to 10 days. So let's just say it is 10 days from now. We'll say it's August 27th, and Kodai Senga is upright and throwing, and his arm, checks out. There's no issues there. His legs are all good to go. Was it the calf strain? Apologies, I'm recording this late at night, and I don't have internet in my car, so I can't look it up quickly. It was a calf, right? I believe it was a calf strain. Regardless, the hope is that, when he starts to get upright and throwing, they can start moving along his process. I don't expect Kodai Senga to pitch at any point in the next, 3-4 weeks for sure. But is there a world where Kodai Senga is ready to go for the end of September and then maybe the playoffs? I still think that is a timetable that could come through for the Mets, but really it's just on this team, just like it was in the first half of the season, to hold down the fort, and then hopefully Kodai Senga can take the Mets somewhere once he comes back. So that's the big wild card. If you get Kodai Senga back healthy, ready to go for the playoffs, and you actually make it, your chances get significantly better come October. So we'll see how that develops. The last one is on Christian Scott, and there's not really any big news. All he said is that he's still throwing, he's playing catch, and that has been going well. But they have not gotten to the point where he is throwing off the slope, where he's throwing bullpens, live batters, all that stuff. Still waiting to see how his arm, I guess, adjusts to playing catch on whatever regular basis they have him doing that on. And so for now, there's no news on Christian Scott. Those two guys could be huge pieces in late September, I feel like. I mean, Christian Scott's ahead of Senga, but I also think that they're going to be, I don't know if I'd say more cautious, because they don't want to hurt Senga as well, but Senga's not coming off an arm injury. It's a leg injury. Christian Scott was your top pitching prospect before he graduated this year, and is a big piece of that 2025 rotation, and he had a sprained UCL. So they're not going to do anything to jeopardize Christian Scott's season next year For now, it is wait-and-see mode on both Senga and Scott, but there is a world where both of them are available to the Mets down the stretch, and that would be a very, very welcome addition. In the final segment today, we're going to talk about Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, little Luisangel Acuna. Just what could we see down the stretch when it comes to either Baty or Acuna taking that spot as a September call-up? And for Vientos, what's the long-term view of him at third base from David Stearns' perspective? I'll get to all that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. You can get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today, where you can now earn up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry feedback if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. As already mentioned, when it comes to the September call-ups, David Stearns said that the guy that gets called up, or the guys that get called up on September 1st, very well could be rotated and called up and down throughout the month of September, as rosters are not locked once you get to September. They just expand to 28, and you have a limit of 14 pitchers. So first and foremost, the Mets are going to add an extra arm to their bullpen. That's almost a sure thing. I doubt that we're going to see a 6-man rotation until Kodai Senga or Christian Scott is ready to return. And even then, that's not going to happen on September 1st. Now, it might happen midway through the month, and that extra roster spot could be very beneficial to the Mets when that happens. But just look at it as a 9-man bullpen, and that's probably the taxi squad reliever that's just turnstile. They're going to be just flipping names throughout the final month, which is a nice benefit to have for a team that's going to have to win as many games as possible in September. When it comes to the position player spot, though, I don't think we're going to see as much of that turnover as Stearns is suggesting. Could we see a couple different guys in September? Absolutely. But in my opinion, it's going to be Brett Baty. I think Brett Baty is going to come up. Luisangel Acuna, while he's on the 40, he has not hit for a month now in AAA. I have to dive back into the numbers to make sure I'm right about that. But he had, it's been so long ago, and I can't even remember if it was a great May or a great June. I believe it was a great June. And it wasn't even necessarily great. It was a really good June. And then I was wondering, is he going to keep it up in July? And he didn't, and he has really struggled since then. So Acuna makes sense as a piece off your bench when it comes to his ability to steal bases and play defense. And that might be something that gets him on the roster this year. Is that the first card that they decide to play on September 1st? I don't believe so. I think they're going to go with the best possible player, and that's Brett Baty. And Brett Baty is getting hot at the right time. He's now homered 4 times in his last 7 games in AAA. And when asked about Brett Baty and his defense at second base, he said, David Stearns did, that Brett Baty has worked really hard over there, and essentially said that he looks good now at second, and pretty much alluded to the fact that he can play that position. And that gives him extra roster flexibility. So now you could start Brett Baty and Mark Vientos in the same lineup with Pete Alonso if you so chose. So I think that has been a really good development for Baty. He now has that ability to play second, to play third. And currently, he's pretty far down on the depth chart when it comes to being a starting player on the Mets. Mark Vientos has clearly passed him up And going into next year, Brett Baty does not have a long runway to just be the starting third baseman, second baseman, whatever. Now, we'll see what roster construction, what position the construction of the roster puts the Mets when that time comes. If Pete Alonso walks, they don't sign another infielder. Yeah, maybe there's a world where the Mets are going into opening day and it's a competition at third base between Brett Baty, Ryan Mauricio, I don't know, even Luis Angel Acuna, and Mark Vientos has slid over to first base. But we're not going to know that for a long time. And Baty, at this point in his career, is going to have to earn every single thing. He's not going to just be given a wide open runway to be the starting player like he was this year. Now, he did earn the job in spring training. He had a good spring. But the Mets were going to give him every opportunity to earn that job. I think that has changed. With that said, going down there, working hard to become a second baseman, that's not easy. He deserves credit for that. And now, like I said, over the past week and change here, he's starting to figure it out with the bat, which is a really good thing because I think the Mets would love to have him come up, be part of the stretch run, get that final bit of development at the big league level to help him hopefully be a bigger piece next year. And he does give you a left-handed theoretical power bat off the bench who could play second and third. So I think we're going to see Brett Baty. I really do. Now, the alternative argument would be Luis Angel Acuna could thrive more in a bit role than Brett Baty could. But I'm not sure if the Mets want to bring Acuna up to just be a bit player instead of getting to play every single day in Syracuse to close out this season and learning as much as they can about Acuna heading into next year when it comes to how he can make adjustments, how he handles playing every day, playing shortstop, playing center field, all of those things. I think it's important for them to keep Acuna on that everyday schedule more than Brett Baty, where he has already come up to the big leagues and he's trying to find his footing. I think it'll be Baty, not Acuna. Now, the other notes that we have about the position players are particularly on Mark Vientos. And David Stearns was very complimentary of Vientos, talking about the adjustments that he's made, from adjusting to be able to play third base to the adjustments he's had to make as the league has adjusted to him. And he has proven that he's a big leaguer. When asked about the future for Mark Vientos, he said that this has been a very good year for Vientos to solidify himself as a major league player. He said that he's improved defensively, where they are running him out there at third base pretty much every day, and that is a testament to all of the work that Mark Vientos has put in. Now, long term, does Mark Vientos fit better on the Mets at third base or first base? It really just depends on what happens to Pete Alonso. And the one thing I'll say about this, for all of you who love Mark Vientos right now, and rightfully so, who think the right move is to move on from Pete because you have Vientos waiting in the wings to be your everyday first baseman for the foreseeable future. What I would say is, yes, you are right about that. Having Vientos as the starting first baseman makes a lot of sense, and that is the best thing for him long term. As much as he has improved defensively at third base, I still think his best position is probably first base. With all of that said, Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso are a better combination of players next year and for years into the future than Mark Vientos and Brett Baty. So if the market does not develop for the Mets on getting a Juan Soto, and the market does not develop for Pete Alonso on getting that lucrative contract that he wants, and the two sides can have a reunion and meet somewhere in the middle on each of their demands and sign a team-friendly deal, the best Mets team next year still probably has Pete Alonso at first and Mark Vientos at third, and Baty being blocked a little bit will have to force his way into playing time. But I don't think the Mets are ready to commit to that. And David Stearns basically said that, just saying that right now the focus is on this season, and next year they're going to consider their options. So we'll see exactly what happens with Vientos beyond 2024. But for now, he's their starting third baseman. He's batting in the 2-hole. Pretty crazy stuff for a guy that did not make the roster, but really exciting all the same. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you who tuned into the show. I now got to get back inside, get on the Wi-Fi, and try to piece this whole thing together. I hope it all comes out good. and you guys get your typical morning release. And I will be back for another show tomorrow, breaking down whatever happens in Saturday's game against the Marlins. So make sure you tune into that. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe there. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with your local experts from each team, your league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.